this is a very special day, DC. April 20th is a very special date for you because 7 years ago, isn't this crazy that's happening today? 7 years ago today, DC, in San Jose, California, young Daniel Cormier made his Ultimate Fighting Championship debut against Frank Mir. And let me tell you something, DC. I was pulling up this card. I mean, of course, I have great memories of all this stuff, but DC, this is a phenomenal card.
It was a good
This
card.
card tied for the most knockouts on a UFC card. Yoel Romero making his UFC debut, the first fight of the night. The curtain jerker beat Clifford Starks. Other notables on the prelims, this was when Team Alpha Male was on fire. TJ Dillashaw won. Jorge Masvidal made his debut. Benavidez, Chad Mendez had a big win. And then the main card was just off the chain. Matt Brown defeated Jordan Meehan. Josh Thompson TKO'd Nate Diaz in his only TKO loss. Daniel Cormier beat Frank Mir via unanimous decision, and Benson Henderson beat Gilbert Melendez in the main event in a Strikeforce versus UFC fight. I still think Gilbert Melendez won that fight.
You know what's funny? I have a friend named Paul, right? He went to junior college with me, and he's a lawyer now, and he comes to all my fights, and he does not miss any. He doesn't miss any fights. And him and his friend Barry, they would come say hi to me, right, before they head out to the arena. This happened when Islam Makhachev knocked out Gleison Tebow in Boston because he fought very early. This night happened in San Jose. Come say hi, head to the arena. This dude told me just recently in my last fight, he goes, heading to the arena, DC. He goes, I don't want to miss anything. I go, really? He goes, I learned after San Jose, when I was in there by myself, there was a young Cuban fighter named Yoel Romero on the undercard. Nobody was there to watch him, but we saw it with our own two eyes, and he landed that beautiful, like, jumping knee or something to finish Clifford Starks, right? And he said,
Yep.
he said, it's good for me to go early because I get to watch the evolution of these dudes' careers. He watches all 13 fights every single time, Ariel, never misses a prelim because he does not know who's going to be the first fight of the night, because what if they turn out to be Yoel Romero? It's crazy, right?
Right.
And
Yeah,
I mean, not many people do that.
And that was a great time because the last Strikeforce event was in January of that year, 2013. So all you guys were making the exodus over. But what do you remember? What memories can you tell us about this? What do you remember about that time?
First off, I remember that was only Fox 7, I think, right? Like 7,
Yep,
number 7.
Yep.
And that was when those Fox cards were still super stacked, right? Getting on the network fight card was, over time, they became a little less special. But I think that happened when they started to show the prelims on Big Fox too. Remember they started doing that? Sometimes they would show the prelims and the main card. Back then it was special, so they stacked them. I remember Bruce Buffer introducing me for the first time. That was because you don't know, and you don't know what's going to happen when you hit the curtain in the UFC, right? Because we didn't know exactly what people thought of Strikeforce. They always treated us as if we were just a little less skilled. We just weren't as good because we weren't in the UFC. And I remember hitting the curtain in San Jose. It was the perfect place. The place went crazy. They went crazy when they introduced me. And then I remember fighting Frank Mir and thinking to myself, this is my first UFC fight. And Frank Mir just fought for the belt. I think he had just fought JDS for the title right before he fought me. So he's one of the top 4 guys in the world. And I remember being in there and fighting them and thinking, wow, this is not much different, and it's not much harder. It's not harder than anything I had experienced in Strikeforce, if not, if not easier, because Barnett and those guys were crazy tough. And I was like, man, the UFC is not much different. But I do remember being very nervous in the back, and Bird Watson, it's time, baby, DC. We rolling. He's holding that white towel. And I'm like, yo, this is actually happening. I was so giddy, Ariel, just to make my UFC debut, and I had made it, and I was gonna fight Frank Mir, a guy that I watched fight at UFC 100, which was my first time really paying attention to it. And I was like, wow, this is the most amazing thing. And I remember just man, this is madness. This is madness.
I was looking at some old pre-fight interviews prior to that card, me and you talking, and there was some good trash talk between you guys. The narrative going to the fight was you saying that Frank Mir is a front runner, that he quits when the going gets tough. He went to Jackson Wink and switched things up, and you guys were giving each other subtle jabs. I don't know if you remember, but I did one of those interviews after the weigh-in where I was standing in between both of you guys. Do you remember that?
I do. And he was like, when I get a hold of your arm, I'm just gonna break it. And I'm like, yo, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
let you break my arm. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
that was amazing.
he was like, I was like, you're not gonna break my arm, Frank. Like, what are you talking? Like, am I just gonna give it to you? It's like it was just, it was just like, and that was when I was like, I was almost astounded that he thought he was just gonna take my arm. Like, what do you think this is? You know, and I felt in that exchange that he may not have respected me as much as I did him because I was coming over from Strike Force. But that was like the second time him and I were supposed to fight out. They were going to send him to Strike Force to fight me in my last Strike Force fight, but then he got hurt. So yeah, it was awesome, man. I remember just preparing at home and knowing I was going to fight at the HP, the SAP Center now. Just it's crazy to me that that was 7 years ago, and now I fought more fights in the UFC than I did even before. I have
Wow.
more fights in the octagon than I did outside of the octagon. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I remember being at the final Strike Force event. You fought Dion Starring. What
That
a
was
strange
bad.
card that was
That was
in
it was
Oklahoma
weird,
City.
right? It was
It
weird,
was
right?
weird. It was like
It
a
was
slow death at this point.
yeah, it was weird. It was very quiet. Like you had guys like Scott and those guys were there, but he wasn't really running Strike Force anymore. It was just this weird vibe. And Dion Starring, like when they signed it, he had these photos of him looking so ripped. But then when he showed up, he like looked like the freaking dude that works at the car dealership. And I was like, what is going on? Like, who is this dude? And then he just, yeah, it was a weird thing. And then I think at the end, who fought? There was a title fight at the end of that fight card.
Yeah, Nate Marquardt against Tarek Safadine.
And Safadine won, right?
Won. Yeah,
Yeah, Tarek Safadine won that fight. And it was just weird. There were a lot of people there, like 7,000 people, but it just was like it was an odd time for Strike Force. It was time for it to be over because you could tell that when it was bought, it didn't mean as much anymore. So it was time to just kind of move everybody over. But then when we moved over, I'm telling you, I take a lot of pride in this, right? Strike Force, when we came over, we kicked some serious butt, man. We kicked some
you did.
serious, we kicked some serious butt in the UFC when we got there. Rhonda, Amanda, Tyron, myself, Luke, uh,
Overeem, Nick Diaz,
Overeem, Diaz, Musasi. We kicked some serious tail when we got over.
Romero, all these guys. No, I mean it
Yeah,
was unbelievable. I
yeah.
was actually thinking about this recently because you're a very loyal
Help
guy.
your sister.
Is it? Do you need to go do
No, no,
something
no.
or?
Daniel just came to get his iPad to help his sister with a little bit of her work. Go ahead.
You're
I'm
such a
sorry.
loyal guy, DC, to Scott Coker and to just
Mhm.
everyone in general. Is it possible if Strike Force never gets sold? Is it possible you just stay with them forever, that you never actually go to the UFC? Or do you think it was inevitable? Did you have to go to the UFC?
I got to be honest with you, man. Like when with Strike Force, okay, at a point, right, when you become the champion and your competitive needs are filled in that arena, right? I'd beaten Josh Barnett, and Overeem had left, and I'd beaten Bigfoot Silva, and then maybe I would have got to fight Fedor, which would have been amazing. But guys that started to kind of go over, right? They were like picking and choosing the guys that they wanted. But if all the guys had stayed the same and nobody left, I think then I have to start looking at where the financials would be. Because I know that I made good money when I was in Strike Force. But when you become a UFC champion, the money is unmatched by any other organization in the world. Like, so if you're going to truly set yourself up for the rest of your life, you had to go to the UFC. So if I would have continued on the path that I was on, winning and becoming champ, I would have probably went to the UFC chasing that money that's in the seven figures. You don't really get that in other places. I'm pretty sure Bellator has got some guys making $1 million, but when you start thinking 2, 3, 4, $5 million, I think those types of paydays are reserved for UFC champions, and I don't think anybody else is paying that.
Do you remember where you were when you found out that Strike Force was sold? You remember how
Yeah,
you found out? I don't know if I ever talked to you about this.
bro, I had a 700 square foot apartment, and Rashad Evans called me and goes, "We just bought you guys." I was like, "Shut up." He was like, "We bought y'all." I was like, "What do you mean you bought something?" I was like, "You didn't buy anything, Rashad." Rashad's like, "We bought you guys." I'm like, "Rashad, you didn't buy nothing. You bought nothing." But he was saying that the UFC had bought Strike Force. But Rashad's talking like he owns the UFC. Like, you didn't buy nothing, Rashad. And then I didn't believe it. And then later on, Bob Cook told me, he goes, the UFC bought Strikeforce. He goes, it's crazy. I never would have thought. And then we started thinking, like, what's next? Because before it was like Strikeforce had that tournament getting started, right? And everybody was like, that's the thing that's going to make sure that Strikeforce is able to sustain itself. But it didn't. All the delays and everything really did make it hard for Strikeforce to stay. But yeah,
You
I
and
was in
Rashad
my
were boys like that?
yeah, we were buddies. We were real good friends, and we talk every now and again now. But he, we don't talk as much as we used to.
And then you were supposed to fight him in your 205 debut.
I was, yeah. Friends
Was
fight
that weird?
sometimes, man. Yeah,
That's right.
friends fight sometimes. But and again, it's not like I was fighting King Mo or Kane or one of those guys that Rashad is my friend, but we kind of he was almost one of the guys that really showed me how to fight right away. He took me out to Grudge Training Center in Colorado, and we trained together. But it was what I had to do. I was on this thing where I was fighting all these UFC champions, right? I had fought Barnett, I had fought Mir, and he was just the next guy. And so nothing was going to stop what I was trying to do, whether it was a friendship or anything. I had to go and do what I needed to do. Wasn't Kane, wasn't nobody in my gym, so I just was going to fight him.
You remember I was the one that did the interview with Dana White when he announced that Zuffa had purchased Strikeforce.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's so crazy about that? I don't know if I've ever told this. Well, I've told this part of the story. I was at the beginning of the Strikeforce Grand Prix in East Rutherford, New Jersey in February of 2011. And that's when Fedor fought Bigfoot Silva, if you recall. Arlovsky got knocked out by Kharitonov. And I remember seeing Scott Coker standing way in the back, like not anywhere near the cage. He was standing in the tunnel, way in the back at the old Izod Center in New Jersey. He was wearing a long trench coat, and he was standing there just kind of like admiring everything and looking around. And I remember going up to him and saying, "What are you doing here, Scott? Like, shouldn't you be up, towards the cage?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just taking it in, this and that." And I swear to God, I remember thinking to myself, that's kind of weird that he's standing here. Come to find out later, they were very much in the midst of negotiations to sell it, and he was getting very nostalgic and sad about the fact that it was coming to an end because less than a month later they sold it to Zuffa, and he didn't want to sell it. It was his partners who sold it, right?
Yep.
The owners of the San Jose Sharks. But here's where it's crazy, DC, how I got that interview, how I got that scoop. UFC on Versus was in Louisville, Kentucky. A week before that, it was Martin Kampmann against Diego Sanchez. And, Dana and I were close back then. And I was supposed to do like a pre-fight interview with him, just like a nothing pre-fight interview with him to promote that card. He texts me and says, "I'm not feeling well, so I'm going to have to cancel." And he never canceled on me. "I'm not feeling well. I'm going to have to cancel, but I'll make it up to you," right? He says, "I'll make it up to you." I was like, "All right, yeah, no problem." A couple days later, he says, "I'm going to make it up to you." And I said, "Cool." He goes, "Do you know how?" I said, "No." He goes, "Come to Las Vegas and I'll make it up to you." And I said, "Well, why do I need to? I live in New York. Like, what do I need to come to Las Vegas?" He goes, "Do you trust me or do you not?" And I remember talking to my boss and being like, "Dana White's telling me that he's going to make it up to us, but he's not telling me what the making up to is." He's like, "Well, what if it's announcing like a new toy or something? You know what I mean? Like, what if there's no payoff?" And I was like, "I think we just need to trust him." So I go to Las Vegas with Casey and Esther Lynn, Casey Leiden, who were my partners in crime, photographer, videographer. Who, by the way, Esther worked for Strikeforce at the time.
Yeah.
Showtime, right? She was a photographer. Walk into his office in Las Vegas. We still don't know what the news is. He closes the door. It's just us, 1, 2, 4 in there. And he goes, "You want to know what it is?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm dying to know. I just flew cross country." He goes, "We just bought Strikeforce." And I was like, "Get out of here."
You drop
Said,
your
"Yeah,
mouth hit the floor.
Yes." He said, "We just bought Strikeforce." And so we did the interview right then and there. Like, I didn't prepare anything. I just did it on the fly. You know what I mean? And then I remember thinking after, I was like, I wonder if Scott Coker is happy about this out. Like, now your job is up in the air as well. Just a crazy set of circumstances.
And you probably thought back to New Jersey, like, oh, that's why Scott was probably in the tunnel. And like he was all like, he was disappointed. Well, that was his thing, right? He did Strikeforce from late 80s, right? When they started doing kickboxing. So I mean, you know that people, you take that hard in business, but business is business. And I believe that the guys that have gone over, we have done really well. I mean, Strikeforce guys have done really well. Nick fought for the title against GSP. Gil fought for the title. I became champ. Tyron became champ. Rhonda became champ. Amanda's the double champ. Misha became champ. All these people are in Strikeforce. So it's But again, man, like think about this, right? Like, and this is no knock on anyone else, right? I love Strikeforce to death, but we were all there, right? We were all there, right? And we were known in the MMA sphere. But imagine who we are today. Would we have been that if we stayed in Strikeforce? That's what I'm asking you. Would we?
Man,
Would
they
I
had
still
some
be who I am?
momentum.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
would
they
I
had some
still be who I am?
momentum.
But would I still be who I am? Would Rhonda still be who she is? Would Misha still be who she is? Would Amanda? Would all these Nick? Nick was already a cult hero, but Nick now is a celebrity. You know, we can go to any place in Los Angeles, any party, any Hollywood gathering, and people know who we are. And I think I don't believe we would have that same effect on pop culture if we stayed in Strikeforce. I just don't know